they're also grabbing people who have green cards or people who have a green card application in process. And of course, there are some citizens that they're grabbing. So it's much broader.
Thank you for coming. Today we have California State Senator Scott Wiener coming to talk about ICE. To try to explain what ICE really is.
ICE is Immigration and Custom Enforcement. It was created about 25 years ago after the September 11th terrorist attacks. There are all these agencies that existed in the federal government that they consolidated into one agency, the Department of Homeland Security. It used to be called INS, Immigration and Naturalization Service. In the Department of Justice, it was moved over to Homeland Security and recreated as ICE. And it does a few things. It does immigration enforcement. They do customs. There are various things that they do. But what we really see now most visibly is the immigration enforcement. And historically, that immigration enforcement has been more limited. It's been about someone has a warrant or they didn't show up in court. What Donald Trump has done is hired many more ICE
officers,
agents and then deployed them to just do roving patrols in communities, or just grabbing people and arresting people, and also arresting people when they show up for their immigration court case. And so it's a much different version of ICE than we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I look at the numbers, right? The average is 746 per day arrests recently under this current administration, right? And it's twice double the past decade. But we have Border Patrol. So how that different from ICE in simple?
Yeah, Border Patrol also is an agency within the Department of Homeland Security that is supposed to be at the border, controlling who comes in and who doesn't come in. Under Trump, Border Patrol, you see inland, which is, I think, illegal. They're not supposed to be doing that.
They're supposed to have a distance between the border and the inland, right?
For example, I believe that the Alex Preddy, the ICU nurse who was publicly executed in Minneapolis, I believe that was a Border Patrol agent who did that, I believe. And so we're now seeing both ICE and Border Patrol and all these agencies that are just now roving patrollers in communities, and it's very confusing, it's illegal, and they're really terrorizing communities.
ICE is mainly arrests illegal immigrants, right? I mean, I won't say illegal. So what is the legal status? Or is the people only have criminal records, right? So what they can do, especially in California.
There was an elderly woman in Diamond Heights in San Francisco who was a nanny who has a work permit, and she was grabbed and held for several days. They did release her. They're also grabbing people who have green cards or people who have a green card application in process. And of course, there are some citizens that they're grabbing. So it's much broader. When Trump said we were going to deport undocumented people who commit serious crimes, I think most people support that. People did not, I think, vote for this just huge operation, grabbing all sorts of people, including people who have never committed a crime, people who have lived here for years or decades, people who have raised families here, started businesses here, are paying taxes, and they're now being arrested.
Yeah. When we talk about, the violent offenders, right? And also the people that have no crime history. And should they concern?
Yeah, so we've seen more ICE activity in Southern California than Northern California, but they are here, and we have seen activity here, and it could change at any time. And we have to be very conscious of what's happening. And there are a lot of people doing good work to notify the community when there is ICE activity. We don't want to unnecessarily scare people. And sometimes there are people who, they say there's ICE, but it's really not ICE. But it's important for people to pay attention to what's going on. if you are an immigrant, but also they are targeting people who aren't immigrants, who, especially Latino people who are citizens. In California, we have adopted a rule that law enforcement in California, our police officers, our sheriffs, California Highway Patrol, etc., their job is to enforce the law of California and keep people safe. They are not immigration agents. And we don't want our state and local law enforcement enforcing federal immigration law. We passed laws last year to make it harder for ICE to get easy access to schools and hospitals, for example. If someone needs to go to the hospital, they should never have to worry, oh, if I go to the hospital, I might get deported. Or if I send my kid to school, they might get deported. So I passed a law a number of years ago. We can't put a shield up. We can't we can't just ban them, but we can require them to have a warrant to be able to enter certain spaces. We also are worried about in the election in June and November that they might try to engage in voter intimidation, having ICE agents around polling places. So there is legislation to try to limit law enforcement activity near polling places, unless there's a specific reason why law enforcement has to be there, like a crime has been committed. And also under the U.S. Constitution, if we are regulating what federal agents can do, we have to apply those same rules to our state and local law enforcement. So it's complicated, but we are doing what we can under the law to protect people.
And that will brings up the most recent you thought the face mask rule, and tell me a bit more about that law.
So what we saw, all this ICE activity way beyond what we had seen before in communities, grabbing people, really creating terror, and to make them have impunity, not be accountable, is they would wear these extreme face masks, sometimes almost ski masks, and not identify themselves, not have any identifying information, and have unmarked vehicles that they were putting people in. So we passed 2 laws last year. One, a law that I authored, banning law enforcement, not just federal, but also local, from wearing these masks, with some exceptions, like for SWAT team and a few other things. And then a separate law to require them to identify themselves. The federal court ruled earlier this month, we do have the power to ban them from wearing masks and require them to identify themselves, but we have to apply those rules to everyone. So in the masking law, we applied it to the federal agents and to local law enforcement, but not to state law enforcement. And that was based on conversations with the governor. We went in that direction. And we thought that was defensible because local law enforcement are the vast majority of law enforcement in California. The court ruled that we have to include the state. So I immediately introduced a new bill to put state officers into the law, and that's pending now, and I hope we can pass it quickly.
From that, so what's the legal boundary between, like state and the federal? People are always confused with both, right?
Yeah. Federal employees frequently have to comply with state law. If you're a federal employee in California or any other state, you have to follow the traffic laws. You have to follow the criminal laws. You can't rob someone just because you're a federal employee. You have to follow these laws as long as they apply across the board. You're not exempt from those laws. There are times when the federal employees are exempt from state law if the state law would prevent the federal employee from carrying out their federal responsibilities. And here, the head of ICE said last year that masking is not essential to the operations of ICE. That was just a choice that individual agents made. And so that's why we believe we have the power to stop them from wearing the masks. So it just really depends on what the activity is.
Yeah. And some Asian immigrants believe that, that's only affects the borders, like the southern border and all that. Is that accurate?
No. And they were in Minneapolis and Chicago. They're in LA, which is not at the border. They were just in San Francisco. They've been in cities around the country. And I've met people from Southern California, U.S. citizens, who have been arrested and held for days in violation of their constitutional rights. We've heard about Asian immigrants, including Chinese, Filipino, Cambodian, who have been grabbed. They're targeting Latino communities the most, but they are really not limiting it. I mentioned the woman in Diamond Heights in San Francisco. She was Russian American, or not a Russian immigrant who was here with a work permit. So they're targeting people from a lot of parts of the world, and that includes Asian immigrants.
Mostly Asian I think it's the business owners, right? They have like a lot of Asian owns restaurants, and what should they aware of, as a business owner for those type of business?
Especially in various businesses, including particularly like restaurants, there are a lot of employees who are immigrants, and some of them may not have documents. And so I think that it's important for employers to know what their rights are if they're contacted by ICE. It's important for those employees to know what their rights are and to be aware of what's happening in the community. And it's very disruptive. It's when you have this enforcement and then you have employees who don't want to go to work. We've seen this especially in Southern California, where there are parts of LA where businesses have had to close down because they do not have enough workers. The workers are scared to go to work. They don't want to leave their homes.
Yeah. So supporters always argue about border enforcement improve public safety. What's your response?
Of course, we have borders and there's regulations at the borders and there's enforcement at the borders in terms of who comes in and who doesn't. But we also need to be clear, like, immigrants who come to this country, whether they come legally or without documents, overwhelmingly are not committing crimes. The crime rate among immigrants is lower than among people who are born in the US. And overwhelmingly, the reason people come here is for economic opportunity. And especially when they come from Central America, it's very dangerous. They're risking their lives, the lives of their kids. They're coming out of desperation, and they come here and they want to work. A lot often start small businesses or micro businesses. They are law-abiding. In fact, they're extra law-abiding because they're undocumented and they don't want to be deported. And they are contributing to the community, and they're typically paying taxes. So it makes me sad that we see these stereotypes that are false about immigrants.
And what happens when immigrants are afraid to report crimes?
That hurts public safety. It makes all of us less safe. If you have people who do not want to report crimes, don't want to be witnesses, don't want to go to court as a victim, don't want to interact with the police, that makes all of us less safe.
But how do we balance that, enforcement and the community at the same time?
You can have border security. You can have smart immigration enforcement, particularly around people who are committing serious crimes. And you can leave people alone who are just law-abiding and working and paying taxes and raising their kids. And by the way, we need to fix our immigration system so that all these people who have been living here for a long time and are members of our community, let's give them a path to a green card and a path to citizenship. These are members of our community. And people who risk their lives to come here and bring their families here, like go through hell to get here, those are exactly the kind of people we should want in our community. These are people who they have worked so hard to come here and risked so much.
Do you expect increased ICE activities in California?
We saw a real surge in Southern California last year, and it's still happening, but it got really bad for a while last year, and it's still happening. So I think that seems to be continuing. We've seen on again, off again in the Central Valley for grabbing farm workers. In the Bay Area, it's been much more sporadic. It's happening, but it's not at the scale. We don't see it's less common to see ICE agents just wandering around neighborhoods. But it could happen. I don't know. They're so unpredictable.
Yeah, and is the state preparing for that at more or less?
Yes, we are absolutely preparing for it. There's been a lot of coordination with local government, and we put all these laws in place to try to reduce the risk. We also have great advocacy organizations, rapid response networks to support immigrant communities to make sure people know what's going on.
And also, do you see the federal immigration law will reform after all this?
I really hope
after
that
all this couple of years,
that has to be prayer. I mean, I think Democrats are going to take back the House. I think we now have a shot of even taking back the Senate, and I think we need to insist on it. And over the last few decades, there have been a lot of like pushes where it seems like we're going to get comprehensive immigration reform, and then it fizzles.
So at the end, so what message would you give the immigrant, today, the viewers
What I will
watching
say
this tonight?
to immigrants and immigrant communities around California, around the country, is that this is a very dangerous and dark time, but there are so many Americans who support our immigrant neighbors, and so many government officials who support our immigrant neighbors. And in California, the governor, our legislature, so many of our local governments fully support and embrace immigrants, and we are going to do everything we can to have your backs during these tough times, and to try to make change so this never happens again.
Right. Thank you so much. And, let's talk again and then moving forward.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.